"Ma'am, don't turn that key." Naomi Blake paused with her hand already wrapped around the door handle, the soft leather cool beneath her fingers. For a fraction of a second, she considered pretending she hadn't heard him. In her world, interruptions were a kind of currency, and she had learned long ago not to spend attention where it yielded no return. But something in the voice cut through the familiar noise of the morning, not loud, not pleading, just steady, edged with urgency that didn't ask for permission. Naomi turned slowly, her expression composed, the kind of calm that unsettled people who expected fear. The parking structure beside Blake Memorial Hospital stretched around them, in gray concrete silence, the air still carrying the damp smell of last night's rain and motor oil. Morning light slipped through the open slats, painting pale stripes across the floor and the rows of parked cars. She had walked this path hundreds of times, always at the same hour, always with the same measured steps. Routine was a form of armor. The man stood several feet away, near the ramp that curved toward the exit. Black, older, his shoulders slightly hunched as if the world had trained him to take up less space. His coat had once been brown. Now it was the color of rusted metal. A shopping cart rested beside him, packed neatly with blankets, plastic bags, and a cracked thermos. Naomi's first reaction was irritation, sharp and immediate. Hospital property. Security should have cleared him out already. She glanced toward the security desk at the far end of the level, then back at him. "I'm busy," she said, her tone polite but final. "You need to step away from the vehicles." The man shook his head once. "Not that one," he replied, nodding toward a row of cars. "Yours." That earned him her full attention. Naomi straightened, her posture instinctively authoritative. At 52, she had perfected a stance that communicated control without effort. CEO of a hospital network, founder of a national foundation fighting child exploitation. A woman accustomed to being listened to. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "If you have a concern, take it to security." "I tried," he answered. His voice was rough, but there was no apology in it. "They told me to move along." Naomi felt a familiar tightening at the base of her skull, the faint pressure that came whenever something threatened to derail her schedule. The meeting upstairs had already run long. Governors, donors, carefully chosen words about timelines and commitments. Another reminder that progress came in inches, not leaps. She did not have time for a confrontation in a parking garage. "Then you should do what they asked," she said, turning back to her car. Her fingers closed around the handle again. "Ma'am," the man said, louder now, "please don't start the engine." The words echoed off concrete and steel, carrying farther than he likely intended. A nurse crossing the level slowed, coffee cup halfway to her mouth. Naomi froze, not because of the words themselves, but because of the certainty behind them. She turned back, her expression cool but her pulse beginning to quicken. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she asked. The man took a breath, steadying himself. "Trying to keep you alive," he said. There was no drama in his tone, no attempt at humor, just fact. Naomi felt heat rise in her cheeks, irritation sharpening into anger. She had spent her life dealing with men who believed they had the right to warn her, to instruct her, to insert themselves into her path. This felt uncomfortably similar. "That's enough," she said. "You're causing a disturbance." "I saw them," he replied. Naomi hesitated. "Saw who?" "The ones who went under your car," he said. He gestured vaguely toward the frame beneath her sedan, then stopped, as if choosing his words carefully. Early this morning, before the sun was up, the parking structure seemed suddenly too quiet. The nurse had disappeared into the elevator, and the delivery truck idled at the far wall, its driver scrolling on his phone. Naomi forced a small, controlled smile. "You expect me to believe that?" she asked. "That you just happened to see something no one else did?" The man met her gaze without flinching. "Most people don't look at the ground," he said. "They look straight ahead." The comment landed harder than she expected. Naomi shifted her weight, irritation giving way to something colder, more calculating. "If this is some kind of scam," she said softly, You've chosen the wrong person. I'm not asking you for money, he replied. I'm asking you to look. Naomi studied him now, really studied him. The lines in his face were deep, carved by years of labor and disappointment. His hands bore old scars, the kind you didn't get from holding a sign at an intersection. There was fear in his eyes, yes, but it wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at something else entirely. What's your name? She asked, surprising herself. The man blinked. Reuben, he said after a beat. Most folks call me Rue. Naomi nodded once. Mr. Carter, she said, guessing correctly from the way his shoulders straightened at the use of a surname. You're telling me someone planted something under my car? Yes, ma'am. And you're certain? Rue's jaw tightened. I used to work with machines, he said. I know the difference between trash and trouble. Naomi felt the faint pressure at the base of her skull intensify. Threats weren't new. Anonymous emails, letters that said she had gone too far, a voicemail once that went silent except for breathing. She had dismissed them all. Awareness was not fear, she reminded herself. Fear was not allowed. If this moment made you pause, if you felt your breath catch when Naomi looked under the car, then this story is for you. Stories like this are about the choices we make when it's easier to walk away than to listen. If you believe those choices matter, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Stay with us for stories that uncover quiet courage, challenge injustice, and remind us that even one decision can change a life. And if this opening resonated with you, leave a comment. Your voice is part of this journey. She glanced around again, then back at her car. The key fob felt heavier than it should have in her hand. If you're wrong, she said quietly, this will not end well for you. Rue nodded once. I know, he replied. But if I'm right, and you drive away. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Naomi hesitated, every instinct warring with another. The cost of stopping was embarrassment, inconvenience, a disruption to her carefully managed morning. The cost of not stopping flashed through her mind in images she refused to fully form. With a controlled exhale, she bent at the waist, the concrete cold seeping through the fabric of her coat as she lowered herself and looked beneath the car. For a heartbeat, she saw nothing but shadow and metal. Then her breath caught. A small, dark object was strapped to the frame, wires taped with meticulous care, a red light blinking steadily, patiently. Naomi straightened slowly, her heartbeat loud in her ears, and met Rue's gaze. He didn't say anything. He didn't smile or gloat or demand thanks. He simply watched her, as if he had known all along that once she looked, nothing would ever be the same. By the time the first patrol car rolled into the parking structure, the air had changed. It wasn't just the wail of sirens echoing through concrete or the sudden choreography of uniforms and radios. It was the way certainty drained out of the space and was replaced by procedure. Naomi stood a few steps back from her car now, arms folded tightly across her chest, her coat forgotten, her mind racing ahead in controlled bursts. The red light under the frame still blinked in her memory, steady and patient, like something that had been waiting for her long before this morning. Rue remained where he was, hands visible, shoulders squared, as if he understood instinctively how easily he could become the wrong kind of story. An officer approached first, young, clean-shaven, eyes darting between Naomi and Rue. Ma'am, are you the owner of the vehicle? Naomi nodded. Yes. Her voice was calm, but she could hear the strain beneath it. There's something attached to the undercarriage. I believe it's an explosive device. The officer's expression shifted, professionalism snapping into place. He raised a hand, signaling distance, and spoke into his radio. Within minutes, the structure filled with controlled urgency. Yellow tape appeared as if conjured from thin air. A bomb squad truck backed in, its tires grinding against concrete. Naomi watched it all with a strange detachment, as though this were happening to someone else, someone less careful, less prepared. Rue took a small step back when an officer motioned him away from the car. Another officer moved to his side almost immediately. "Sir, I need you to come with me," the officer said, his tone neutral but firm. Rue complied without protest, though Naomi noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw. "I didn't touch it," he said quietly, more to the space than to anyone in particular. "I just saw it. We'll sort that out," the officer replied, already guiding him toward a pillar. Naomi's first instinct was to intervene, to say something, but the words stuck. This was the part of the world she understood less well, the moment where authority decided who needed to be controlled before facts were established. She told herself to stay focused. There would be time later to clarify. Right now, the priority was survival. A technician in heavy protective gear crouched beneath her car, movements precise, almost reverent. Naomi looked away, her gaze drifting to the far wall where a small cluster of hospital staff had gathered, whispering. She caught snippets as she passed. "Did you hear? They say it was a homeless guy. Probably a stunt." The words landed like small blows. A tall man in a suit approached her, flashing a badge. "Miss Blake, I'm Detective Harris. We'll need to ask you a few questions." Naomi nodded again. Her face composed, she answered what she could. Where had she been that morning? Had she noticed anyone near her vehicle earlier? Had she received threats? She kept her responses factual, measured, the way she had testified before committees and boards. When Harris asked about Rue, her gaze flicked briefly toward where he now stood with two officers, his shopping cart set aside like evidence. "He warned me," she said. "He told me to look under the car." Harris's expression was unreadable. "Did you know him?" "No." "Did he ask you for anything?" Naomi hesitated, then shook her head. "No." Harris made a note. "We'll need to speak with him separately." Naomi watched him walk away and felt an unexpected twinge of unease. She had answered truthfully. But truth, she knew, was often shaped by who asked the questions. The bomb squad leader approached next, his voice low and controlled. "Ma'am, it's real," he said, professionally assembled, pressure triggered. "You're lucky you didn't start the engine." Lucky. The word felt inadequate. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "Can you disable it?" "We can," he replied. But this wasn't random. She nodded. She hadn't thought it was. Across the structure, a camera crew appeared at the entrance, their presence announced by the sudden flare of lights. Naomi's jaw tightened. News traveled fast, especially when it involved her name. She could already imagine the headlines forming, the speculation, CEO targeted, hospital bomb threat, and somewhere beneath it all, the quieter narrative already taking shape, homeless man involved. Naomi glanced back at Rue. An officer was patting him down now, methodical, impersonal. Rue's eyes met hers across the distance, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not gratitude, not accusation, recognition. They led him away a few minutes later, toward a patrol car parked just beyond the tape. Naomi felt a sharp, unexpected pull in her chest. "Detective," she said, stepping toward Harris. "He didn't do this." Harris raised an eyebrow. "We don't know that yet, ma'am." "He saved my life," she replied, her voice firmer now. "If he wanted to harm me, he had every opportunity not to say anything." Harris studied her for a beat, then nodded slowly. "We'll take that into account." It was the kind of answer that promised nothing. Naomi watched Rue climb into the back of the car, his movements stiff but dignified. The door closed with a final, hollow sound. The patrol car pulled away, disappearing up the ramp. Naomi stood very still, the weight of what she hadn't said pressing on her. She had not insisted. She had not followed. She had let the system do what it always did when faced with someone like Rue. By the time the device was removed and the structure reopened, the morning had slipped away. Naomi declined a ride and walked instead, her heels clicking against the sidewalk as she crossed toward her office building. Her phone buzzed constantly in her hand, messages from her assistant, from the board, from a reporter she recognized by name, She ignored them all. Her thoughts kept circling back to Rue's voice, steady and unadorned. Don't start the engine. She had built an entire career on listening to data, to experts, to advisors who spoke her language. And yet the most important warning she had received in years had come from a man she had almost dismissed without a glance. Naomi stopped at the corner, the light red, traffic rushing past. She imagined what would have happened if she hadn't listened. The headline would have been different then. A memorial, a foundation in mourning. She exhaled slowly, the breath catching as something settled into place inside her. This was not over. Not for her. Not for Rue. Somewhere between the blinking red light beneath her car and the closing door of the patrol car, a line had been crossed, and Naomi Blake, who had spent decades believing she understood how justice worked, was beginning to realize how much she had been willing not to see. Naomi Blake did not go home that night. She went to her office, a glass and steel corner suite overlooking the Cuyahoga River, and stood there long after the sun had slipped behind the low industrial skyline. Cleveland at dusk always looked like a city holding its breath, caught between what it had been and what it still hoped to become. She had chosen this city deliberately years ago, believing that places with scars understood the language of repair. Tonight, the reflection in the window showed her a woman who looked composed but felt strangely hollow, as if something essential had been pulled loose without her noticing the moment it happened. Her phone lay face down on the desk. It had been buzzing all afternoon. Board members, donors, the hospital's legal counsel, and at least 3 reporters whose numbers she recognized without looking. Naomi knew what they wanted. A statement, a narrative, something clean and reassuring that would keep panic contained and stock prices steady. She had delivered those before, always with the same calm authority. This time, the words refused to line up. Instead, her mind kept replaying the image of Rue standing beside his shopping cart, hands visible, shoulders squared, already bracing for the version of events that would paint him as the problem. She finally picked up the phone and dialed her assistant. "Cancel everything tomorrow morning," she said when the call connected. "Clear my schedule until noon." There was a pause on the other end. "All of it?" "All of it," Naomi repeated. "And I want a full briefing from hospital security, names, vendors, contracts, anyone with access to the garage." Another pause, longer this time. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Naomi stared out at the river, its dark surface broken by the slow churn of barges. "Yes," she said, "something that shouldn't be there." When she hung up, she turned the phone face down again, as if to keep it from asking more questions. Across town, in a windowless interview room at the precinct, Rue sat with his hands folded on the metal table. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright, too unforgiving. He had been searched twice, his cart catalogued and pushed aside like an inconvenience. The officers had been professional, mostly, but professionalism did not erase the weight of suspicion that clung to him. He could feel it in the way their eyes lingered, in the careful distance they kept. A detective entered, older than the first, his movements unhurried. He placed a folder on the table and took the chair across from Rue. "Mr. Carter," he said, flipping the folder open. "Help me understand why you were in the garage this morning." Rue inhaled slowly. "Because that's where I sleep when it rains," he replied. The detective nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "And you just happened to notice someone working under a car belonging to one of the most prominent CEOs in the city?" Rue's mouth tightened. "I notice things," he said. "It's how you survive when people don't notice you." The detective leaned back slightly. "Did you touch the device?" "No." "Did you know what it was?" Rue hesitated. "I knew it didn't belong there." He told them about the early morning hours, about the 2 men who moved with purpose, about the way they checked the garage entrance before crawling under the sedan. He described the tape, the wires, the way one of them wiped his hands on a rag when he finished. The detective listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Rue finished, the room fell quiet. "You understand how this looks," the detective said finally. Rue met his gaze. "I understand how it always looks," he replied. The detective closed the folder. "For now, we're holding you as a material witness," he said. "That means you're not free to go." Rue nodded once. He had not expected anything else. Back in her office, Naomi poured herself a glass of water and didn't drink it. She stood there, fingers resting on the rim, and allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. Her thoughts drifted backward, uninvited, to a younger version of herself sitting at her father's kitchen table, listening to him talk about the plant where he worked and the men who'd been laid off when it closed. He had taught her to believe in systems, in contracts and procedures, because those were the things that were supposed to protect people like him. She had believed him. She still did, mostly. But systems, she was realizing, only worked for those they were designed to see. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she answered. "Naomi," said the voice of her head of legal affairs, careful and concerned. "We need to get ahead of this." "Ahead of what?" Naomi asked. "The story," he replied. "There's already chatter online suggesting the individual who alerted you may have been involved. We should distance the foundation until the investigation concludes." Naomi closed her eyes. "Distance," she repeated. "Yes," he said. "For your protection." She opened her eyes and looked at the city again. "No," she said. "We're not doing that." There was silence on the line. "I'm sorry? We are not distancing ourselves from the man who saved my life," Naomi said, her voice steady but unyielding. "You can draft a statement that says exactly that." "Naomi," he began, caution creeping in. "This could complicate things." "So be it," she replied. "Sometimes things need to be complicated." After she ended the call, Naomi sank into her chair, the leather creaking softly beneath her. She thought of the way Rue had looked at her in the garage, not accusing, not expectant, just waiting for her to do what she would do next. The realization unsettled her. Power, she had learned, was as much about omission as action. You didn't have to harm someone directly to let harm occur. You just had to look away. She picked up her phone again and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Detective Harris answered on the second ring. "Miss Blake," he said, "I was just about to call you." "I want to see him," Naomi said. There was a brief pause. "See who?" "Rue Carter," she replied. "Tonight," Harris exhaled audibly. "That's unusual." "So was today," Naomi said. "I won't interfere. I just want to hear him." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll see what I can do," Harris said finally. Naomi hung up and leaned back, a strange mix of resolve and unease settling over her. In the interview room, Rue stared at the blank wall opposite him, tracing the cracks in the paint with his eyes. He had learned long ago that waiting was a skill. You waited for food. You waited for shelter. You waited for people to decide whether you mattered. Tonight, he waited for something else, though he couldn't have named it if asked. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and footsteps approached. Rue straightened slightly as the handle turned. He did not know what he expected to see on the other side, only that whatever came next would carry weight. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that two lives had already begun to bend toward each other, pulled by a truth neither could unsee. The interview room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee, a scent that clung to places where people waited to be judged. Rue sat at the metal table, his hands folded the way he'd learned to keep them visible, still, unthreatening. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was steady, almost hypnotic. He had stopped counting the minutes. Time inside rooms like this didn't move forward. It circled, looping back on itself until you learn not to expect anything from it. When the door finally opened, he lifted his head, expecting another officer, another question framed like a trap. Instead, Naomi Blake stepped inside. She looked different without the armor of a podium or a press line. Her coat was draped over one arm, her sleeves rolled just enough to suggest she'd been awake longer than planned. For a brief moment, she hesitated in the doorway, as if recalibrating herself to the smaller space. Rue noticed the way her eyes took in the room before settling on him. not scanning for exits or witnesses, but lingering, as though she were forcing herself to see the details she usually filtered out. Detective Harris followed her in and closed the door behind them. "I'll be right outside," he said, his tone careful. Naomi nodded. "Thank you." When the door shut, the room felt even smaller. Naomi didn't sit right away. She rested her coat on the back of the spare chair and remained standing, her hands loosely clasped. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice quieter than Rue expected. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Rue studied her for a second. "Didn't know I had a choice," he replied. There was no bite in the words, just honesty. Naomi absorbed that without flinching. "You're right," she said, "and I'm aware of how that sounds, coming from me." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat, aligning herself at eye level rather than looming over the table. It was a small thing, but Rue noticed. People who wanted something from you usually stood. "I wanted to hear it from you," Naomi continued. "What you saw, not for the report, for me." Rue considered her, weighing instinct against experience. "You already heard," he said. "They crawled under your car, did their work, left." Naomi nodded. "Yes, I heard the facts." She hesitated, then added, "I want to understand the part that doesn't make it into a statement." Rue let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He leaned back slightly, the chair creaking. "I was fixing the cart," he said. "One wheel sticks, makes noise. Noise draws attention." Naomi listened, her expression unreadable. "I saw the men because they moved like they didn't belong," Rue went on. "People who belong somewhere don't look over their shoulders that much." He paused. "I thought about leaving, thought about minding my own business." Naomi's gaze sharpened. "What stopped you?" Rue met her eyes. "I thought about how easy it would be for someone like you to never know," he said, "and how easy it would be for someone like me to disappear after." The words settled heavily between them. Naomi felt a tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. She nodded slowly. "I almost didn't listen," she admitted. The confession surprised her as soon as it left her mouth, but she didn't take it back. "I almost got in the car and drove away." Rue's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "Most folks would have," he said. Naomi swallowed. "I've built my life on the belief that I pay attention," she said, "that I see what matters." She gestured vaguely, as if encompassing the garage, the device, the city beyond. "Today showed me how selective that attention can be." Rue watched her carefully. He had heard apologies before, usually framed to soften the speaker rather than acknowledge the harm. This sounded different, or maybe he wanted it to be. Naomi straightened, the familiar edge of resolve returning to her voice. "They're treating you as a suspect," she said. Rue shrugged. "They always do." "That will change," Naomi said, more statement than promise. "I can't dictate procedure, but I can make sure your account is heard." Rue studied her face for signs of performance, of rehearsed compassion. He found none. "Why?" he asked simply. Naomi didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "Because you didn't have to speak up," she said. "And you did." Rue considered that. "That's not heroics," he said. "That's just not wanting blood on your conscience." Naomi nodded. "Sometimes those are the same thing." Silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside the room, footsteps passed, voices murmured. Inside, two people sat with the shared knowledge that something irreversible had already happened. Naomi leaned forward slightly. "I want you to know," she said, choosing her words carefully, "that I won't let this end with you being blamed for someone else's crime." Rue's expression remained guarded. "People say things," he replied. "Then they go back to their lives." Naomi met his gaze steadily. "I don't intend to," she said. The conviction in her voice was quiet but unmistakable. There was a knock at the door, and Detective Harris peeked in. "We're wrapping up for the night," he said. "Mr. Carter will be moved to a holding area until morning." Naomi nodded and stood. She hesitated, then extended her hand across the table. It was a deliberate gesture, stripped of ceremony. Rue looked at it for a moment before taking it. Her grip was firm, warm. "Thank you," Naomi said again, this time without qualifiers. Rue released her hand and gave a small nod. "Just do what you said," he replied. Naomi inclined her head, accepting the charge implicit in his words. She retrieved her coat and moved toward the door, then paused. "Mr. Carter," she said, turning back, "I don't believe in coincidences." Rue raised an eyebrow. "Neither do I," he said. Naomi left then, the door closing softly behind her. As Rue was led out moments later, he felt a subtle shift inside him, something like cautious expectation. He had seen powerful people before, had heard their words. This felt different, though he couldn't have explained why. Somewhere across the city, Naomi Blake stepped into the night air, the river glinting darkly below the streetlights. She drew in a breath, feeling the weight of what she had begun to carry. The device under her car had been removed, its threat neutralized, but the warning it delivered lingered, insistent and unresolved. Act I of her life, she realized, had just ended. What followed would demand more than attention. It would demand change. Morning arrived without apology. Naomi Blake woke before her alarm, the pale gray light of Cleveland pressing through the bedroom curtains like a question she couldn't postpone. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the muted clank of a barge horn on the river, grounding herself in familiar sounds. Then memory surged back in sharp fragments, the blinking red light under her car, the closing door of the patrol vehicle, Rue's steady voice in the interview room. She sat up, already aware that whatever rhythm her life had followed before yesterday was gone. By the time she reached her office, the building was awake in a way that felt watchful rather than productive. Conversations stopped when she passed. Eyes followed. Her assistant met her at the door with a tablet clutched to her chest, expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," she said, then hesitated. The phone started ringing at 6. Naomi nodded, slipping out of her coat. "I'm sure they did." She moved toward her desk, glass walls offering no real privacy, and glanced at the headlines scrolling across the tablet her assistant handed her. CEO targeted in parking garage incident. Bomb scare shakes Blake Memorial. And beneath it, smaller, sharper, already doing its quiet damage, homeless man questioned in connection to device. Naomi felt her jaw tighten. "What's legal saying?" she asked. "They want to release a statement emphasizing cooperation with authorities," her assistant replied, "and distancing the foundation from any individual under investigation." Distancing. The word echoed unpleasantly. Naomi handed back the tablet. "Tell them to hold," she said. "I want facts before we polish language." Her assistant nodded, relief flickering across her face at the clarity of instruction. Across town, Rue woke to the rattle of a metal door and the harsh buzz of fluorescent lights snapping on. The holding area was colder than the interview room, the bench unforgiving beneath his stiff back. He had slept in fragments, dreams interrupted by the scrape of boots and the echo of voices. An officer slid a paper cup of coffee through the slot without comment. Rue wrapped his hands around it, grateful for the warmth more than the taste. He had learned long ago not to expect kindness from institutions. What unsettled him now was not the confinement itself, but the sense that his name was already moving through the city without him, reshaped by mouths that did not know him. By mid-morning, the narrative had hardened. Naomi watched it take shape on screens and feeds, a familiar process she had once understood as necessary simplification. Now it felt like erosion. A reporter speculated aloud about motive. A talking head suggested opportunism. Security footage was mentioned without context. Each phrase nudged the story towards suspicion, and Rue's absence from the conversation made it easier. Naomi felt a pulse of anger she rarely allowed herself. Not explosive, but cold, focused. She called Detective Harris. "Where are we?" she asked when he answered. "Still sorting through leads," he replied. "Your friend is being cooperative." He's not my friend, Naomi said evenly. He's a witness. Harris paused. That's not how everyone sees it. Then they're wrong, she replied. At noon, Naomi stood before a bank of microphones in the hospital's press room, the logo of Blake Memorial stark behind her. She had declined to read a prepared statement, opting instead for measured honesty. An explosive device was discovered under my vehicle yesterday morning, she said. Thanks to the actions of a private citizen, no one was harmed. Cameras clicked. That individual is currently being questioned, a reporter interjected. Naomi met the reporter's gaze. That individual alerted me to the danger, she said. Without him, I would not be standing here. A murmur rippled through the room. Are you suggesting he's a hero? Another voice asked. Naomi took a breath. I'm suggesting that we not rush to judgment, she replied, and that we remember the difference between suspicion and evidence. It wasn't a fiery speech. It wasn't meant to be. It was a line drawn with quiet precision. Back in the holding area, Rue heard the television mounted high on the wall crackle to life. A news anchor's face filled the screen, polished and concerned. Rue listened as his situation was summarized in broad strokes, his role reduced to a phrase that made his shoulders tense. Person of interest. He snorted softly. Figures, he muttered. The man on the bench beside him glanced over, then away. You the guy from the garage? He asked. Rue nodded once. They always need a guy, the man said, not unkindly. Rue didn't respond. He was thinking of Naomi's face when she'd sat across from him, of the way she'd chosen her words. He didn't know if it would matter. That afternoon, Naomi retreated to her office and closed the door, something she rarely did. She spread documents across her desk, security contracts, vendor lists, maintenance schedules. If someone had accessed her car, they had likely accessed others. Patterns would exist. They always did. As she worked, her mind kept returning to a simpler, more uncomfortable truth. She had been willing, for a moment, to let the system swallow Rue because it was easier, because it maintained order. The realization stung. She thought of her father again, of his faith in processes that had failed him quietly. Justice, she was beginning to see, was not a machine you turned on and trusted to run. It was a practice, and practices required participation. By evening, Harris called with an update. We found residue on the device consistent with a known signature, he said. Organized. Not your witness's style. Naomi exhaled slowly. Then release him, she said. Harris hesitated. We're not there yet. Then get there, Naomi replied, her voice firm but controlled. Every hour he sits there reinforces a lie. There was silence on the line. You're asking me to move fast, Harris said. I'm asking you to move right, Naomi answered. As dusk settled, Rue was escorted back into the interview room. Harris entered, closing the door behind him. We're making progress, he said. Rue studied his face. That mean I get to leave? Harris shook his head. Not yet. Rue nodded, disappointment tempered by experience. Figured. Harris hesitated. For what it's worth, he said, Miss Blake spoke up today. Rue raised an eyebrow. She did? Publicly, Harris confirmed. Rue leaned back, absorbing that. That takes guts, he said quietly. Harris didn't disagree. Later that night, Naomi stood alone by her office window again, city lights flickering like distant signals. She thought of Rue on that hard bench, waiting. She thought of the word suspect, how easily it attached itself to certain bodies, certain lives. Tomorrow, she knew, the story would continue to shift. Evidence would surface. Lines would be redrawn. But something else had already changed. She was no longer content to let justice be abstract. It had a face now, a voice she could not unhear. And whatever came next, Naomi Blake understood one thing with growing clarity. Silence was no longer an option. Naomi Blake discovered the footage just after midnight, when the building had gone quiet, and even the river outside seemed to move more slowly. She had sent her assistant home hours earlier and turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the desk lamp casting a tight circle across stacks of documents and a laptop pulled close like a confidant. Fatigue pressed behind her eyes, but she ignored it. This was the hour when defenses lowered and patterns revealed themselves, when people assumed no one important was watching. Naomi had learned early in her career that power left traces. You only had to be patient enough to follow them. The security files came in layers, each one dull on its own. Timestamps, access logs, camera angles from corners no one ever noticed unless something went wrong. She moved through them methodically, the way she used to move through financial audits, looking not for what stood out but for what blended in too well. The garage cameras from early morning were grainy, their lenses streaked with condensation, but they worked. She slowed the playback, then slowed it again, watching the empty concrete breathe in the half-light. At 4:17 a.m., a figure appeared at the far end of the frame, pushing a cart. Naomi leaned closer, her heart ticking a little faster. Rue. He stopped near the ramp, crouched briefly, then moved on. No device, no lingering. At 4:29, two more figures entered the frame. They wore caps pulled low and jackets zipped to the chin, but what caught Naomi's attention wasn't their caution, it was their confidence. They moved like people who knew where they were allowed to be. One of them carried a tool bag slung casually over his shoulder. Naomi paused the frame and zoomed in. The logo on the bag sharpened slowly, resolving into a familiar mark. A vendor she recognized immediately, her hospital's facilities contractor. She felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. She advanced the footage frame by frame. The men checked the camera's blind spot with practiced ease, then slid under her car. The angle hid most of their work, but the timestamps told the rest of the story. 12 minutes, long enough to be thorough, long enough to believe no one would interrupt them. Naomi sat back, the chair creaking softly. This wasn't random. This wasn't an outsider breaching her world. This was her world turning inward, the threat wearing an ID badge that opened doors. The realization carried a sting sharper than fear. She had built her life on systems, on contracts vetted and renewed, on the belief that process equaled safety. Now she saw how easily process could be used as camouflage. She replayed the moment Rue had described, the way he'd said they moved like they didn't belong. He had been right, and she had almost missed it because belonging, in her mind, had always looked like paperwork and permission. Her phone buzzed, vibrating against the desk. She ignored it and pulled up the vendor list, cross-referencing schedules, access cards, maintenance calls. The pattern emerged quickly once she knew where to look. A late-night inspection request logged without a corresponding work order. A supervisor's approval code used twice in 1 week, both times outside normal hours. Naomi felt a pulse of anger, controlled but fierce. The betrayal was intimate. It had passed through her systems and settled beneath her car, waiting. She thought of Rue again, of how the system had turned on him instead, how suspicion had flowed to the most convenient target. The midpoint landed with quiet force. The danger was not at the margins, it was inside. She dialed Detective Harris, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "I have something," she said when he answered. "Footage from the garage, clear enough to identify the contractor." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Send it," Harris said. "Now." She did, attaching stills and timestamps, then followed with the vendor name and access codes. "This isn't a coincidence," she added. "Someone used my infrastructure to get to me." Harris was quiet for a moment. "That changes things," he said finally. "It does," Naomi agreed. "And it changes how long we can justify holding the wrong man." Across town, Rue sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the holding area, lacing and unlacing his fingers, a habit he fell into when his thoughts crowded too close. The television murmured low, a weather report rolling across the screen. Rain expected overnight. He wondered where he would be sleeping if he were released. The thought was strangely distant, as if his life had been paused mid-sentence. A guard passed the door and glanced in, then kept walking. Rue leaned back and stared at the ceiling, tracing a crack that looked like a river splitting in two. He thought about the men he'd seen that morning, about the way they hadn't looked at him at all. Invisibility was a kind of shield, until it wasn't. The door opened, and Harris stepped inside, his posture different now, less guarded. "We reviewed the footage," he said. Rue studied his face. "And?" Harris exhaled. "You weren't lying." Rue let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It wasn't relief so much as vindication, quiet and heavy. "Never said I was," he replied. Harris nodded. "We're shifting focus," he said. "You're still a witness. But you're no longer our prime concern." Rue tilted his head. "That mean I get to leave?" Harris hesitated. "Soon," he said. "There are procedures." Rue gave a short, humorless laugh. "Always are." Back at her office, Naomi stood and paced for the first time that night, energy flooding her limbs. The discovery clarified everything and complicated it all at once. If the contractor was involved, then the motive likely reached beyond her alone. This was about the work she'd been doing, the routes she'd disrupted, the quiet profits she'd threatened. She thought of the shelter her foundation had funded, the reports she'd skimmed and approved. How many doors had she opened without looking closely enough at who walked through them? The thought left a bitter taste. Justice, she was learning, didn't fail loudly. It failed by omission. Her phone rang again, this time with a number she didn't recognize. She answered anyway. "Miss Blake," said a measured voice. "This is Deputy Commissioner Feldman. We understand you've been sharing internal security footage." Naomi straightened. "I've been sharing evidence," she replied. "There's a difference." Feldman cleared his throat. "We'd appreciate discretion," he said. "Until we have a fuller picture." Naomi's gaze drifted to the dark river beyond the glass. "Discretion is what put an innocent man in a cell," she said. "I'm done confusing it with responsibility." Silence stretched on the line. "You're making this harder," Feldman said. "I'm making it honest," Naomi replied, and ended the call. Near dawn, Harris called again. "We're bringing Rue in as a protected witness," he said, "and we're moving on the contractor." Naomi closed her eyes, a tight knot loosening in her chest. "Thank you," she said. "This is only the beginning," Harris warned. "I know," Naomi replied. When the line went dead, she stood quietly, the city beginning to lighten beyond the windows. The midpoint had passed, and the story had turned. The enemy was no longer faceless. The system had revealed its cracks. Naomi Blake understood now that whatever came next would not be managed with statements or distance. It would require her to step into the mess she had once believed she could oversee from above, and to do so with eyes open, listening for voices she had learned, too late, to hear.
The shelter sat on the edge of the old industrial corridor, a low brick building wedged between a shuttered tire plant and a check-cashing store with bars on its windows. Naomi Blake had driven past places like this for years, without stopping noting them only as dots on grant proposals and quarterly reports. Now she parked across the street and remained in the car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, taking in the details she had once considered peripheral. The paint around the shelter's entrance was chipped, the sign slightly crooked. The word hope faded more than the rest. A line of people had already formed along the wall, coats pulled tight against the chill, their faces turned inward, conserving energy the way experience taught them to do. She had come without an entourage, without press or security, wearing a plain navy coat and low boots that marked her as someone trying not to be noticed. Detective Harris had advised against it, had suggested waiting until warrants were served and arrests made. Naomi had listened, then declined. This part she knew couldn't be done from behind a desk. If the system had been breached here, she needed to see it with her own eyes. She stepped out of the car and crossed the street, the sound of her boots sharp on cracked pavement. A few heads turned. Most did not. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and overcooked oatmeal. A television mounted high on the wall played a daytime talk show at low volume, the laughter jarringly out of place. Folding chairs lined the room, some occupied, others stacked against the wall. A man in a polo shirt with the shelter's logo stitched over the chest looked up from behind the front desk. "Can I help you?" he asked, his smile practiced and thin. "I'm Naomi Blake," she said, offering no title. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by calculation. "Of course," he said. "We weren't expecting you." "I imagine not," Naomi replied. "I'm here to observe." The man hesitated, then nodded. "We're in the middle of breakfast service," he said. "You're welcome to join." Naomi inclined her head and moved past him, her gaze sweeping the room. She noticed the small things first. The way a volunteer barked instructions without making eye contact, the way a young woman flinched when a staff member raised his voice. The sign taped to the wall listing rules in bold, unforgiving font. No loitering. No questions. No exceptions. Naomi felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Order masquerading as care. She moved slowly, listening to fragments of conversation. The low murmur of lives paused midstream. A man with gray stubble glanced up at her. "You lost?" he asked. "No," Naomi said quietly. "I think I've been missing something." He studied her for a moment, then looked away. "Ain't we all?" he muttered. In a small office off the main room, Naomi met the shelter's director, a woman named Carol who spoke in the careful cadence of someone accustomed to audits. "We're grateful for the Foundation's continued support," Carol said, folding her hands on the desk. "We do the best we can with limited resources." Naomi nodded. "I'm sure you do," she said. "Tell me about your overnight intake." Carol launched into statistics, numbers polished and reassuring. As she spoke, Naomi's eyes drifted to a corkboard on the wall, cluttered with notices and handwritten lists. One caught her attention, names crossed out in red ink, dates scribbled beside them. "What's that?" Naomi asked. Carol glanced back, then smiled. "Former residents," she said. "People who've moved on." Naomi stood and stepped closer. Some of the dates were weeks old, others months. Moved on where, she asked. Carol's smile tightened. "Different places," she said. "We don't always know." Naomi thought of Rue's words of missing teenagers and people who disappeared quietly. She turned back. "Do you report these departures?" she asked. Carol's shoulders stiffened. "We're not required to," she said. "Adults can leave whenever they choose." Outside in the alley behind the shelter, Naomi spotted a figure she recognized instantly. Rue stood near a dumpster, hands in his pockets, his posture guarded but familiar. He looked thinner in the daylight, his face drawn but alert. Naomi approached slowly, giving him space. "They let you out," she said. Rue nodded. "This morning," he replied. Harris said, "I was clear." Naomi exhaled. "I'm glad she said." Rue glanced toward the building. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "That's why I am," Naomi replied. Rue studied her for a moment, then jerked his chin toward the alley. "You want to know what goes on?" he asked. "Don't ask them." He gestured back toward the shelter. "Ask the people who sleep outside." Naomi followed his gaze to a cluster of men and women huddled near the loading dock. "They don't like questions." Rue continued. "Especially about the kids." Naomi's heart skipped. "Kids?" she asked. Rue nodded grimly. "Young ones come through sometimes," he said. "Runaways. Foster kids who age out. They don't stay long." Naomi felt a chill despite the sun. Why Rue met her eyes. "Because someone always shows up asking about them," he said. "Offering rides, work, a way out." Naomi's jaw tightened. The pieces began to align, ugly and unmistakable. The contractor, the access, the shelter. "Have you told anyone this?" she asked. Rue shrugged. "Told staff once," he said. "They told me to mind my own business." Naomi closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "That ends now," she said. Rue gave a short, humorless laugh. "I'll believe it when I see it," he replied. Naomi nodded. "That's fair." Inside, Naomi requested access to the shelter's records, citing her foundation's oversight role. Carol resisted, citing privacy policy procedure. Naomi pushed back calmly, relentlessly. By the time she left, she carried copies of intake logs and staff schedules, the weight of them heavy in her bag. Outside, she paused beside Rue. "I'm going to need your help," she said. Rue looked at her, skepticism etched deep. "Doing what he asked?" Naomi met his gaze. "Telling the truth," she replied. Rue considered this, then nodded slowly. "Truth's dangerous," he said. Naomi's mouth tightened. "So is silence," she answered. As Naomi walked back to her car, she felt the story pulling tighter around her, the stakes rising. The enemy was no longer abstract. It had faces, routines, places that hid in plain sight. The shelter behind her looked unchanged, but she knew better now. Justice had entered the building quietly unwelcome, and once inside it would not leave without a fight. The offer came that evening, delivered with the smoothness of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Naomi Blake was back in her office when her assistant announced that Deputy Commissioner Feldman was on the line, along with a representative from the mayor's office. Naomi closed the folders she had been reading, intake logs from the shelter names, circled dates underlined, and gestured for the call to be put through. The river outside her window was dark now, reflecting city lights in broken lines that reminded her, uncomfortably, of the lists she'd just reviewed. People didn't disappear all at once. They vanished in fragments, one unchecked box at a time. Ms. Blake Feldman began, his voice genial, practiced. "Thank you for making yourself available." "I didn't," Naomi replied calmly. "You called." There was a brief, polite laugh on the other end. "We'll get right to it," said the second voice, smoother still. "You've had a difficult 48 hours. We appreciate your cooperation." Naomi said nothing. She had learned that silence often encouraged people to reveal more than they intended. "There's concern," the voice continued, "that matters are escalating in ways that could harm public confidence." Naomi leaned back in her chair. "Public confidence in what?" she asked. "In our institutions," Feldman replied. "In your hospital system. In the city's ability to protect its citizens." Naomi glanced at the intake logs again, at the crossed-out names. "Citizens," she repeated. "Is that what we're talking about?" Feldman cleared his throat. "We understand you visited one of the shelters your foundation supports," he said, "and that you've been requesting internal records." "Yes," Naomi said. "Because children are disappearing." The line went quiet for a beat too long. "There is no evidence of that," the mayor's representative said finally. Naomi felt a flicker of anger, controlled but sharp. "There is evidence," she replied. "There are patterns, there are gaps, and there are people who benefit from those gaps." Feldman's tone softened. "Naomi," he said, using her first name, "we're asking you to let the investigation run its course." "It is running its course," she said, "just not toward the truth." The second voice sighed. "This doesn't have to be adversarial," he said. "You've done important work. No one wants that overshadowed by speculation." There it was, the pivot she recognized. Praise followed by pressure. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Naomi asked. Feldman answered this time. "Step back," he said. "Release a statement affirming your trust in the process. Limit further public comment. Let us handle the shelter matter internally." Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Images surfaced unbidden Rue in the alley, his voice low and steady. The flinch she'd seen when a staff member raised his voice. The children who didn't stay long. And in return, she asked. In return, Feldman said carefully, we ensure this doesn't become something larger than it needs to be. Naomi opened her eyes and looked out at the city. You're offering me protection, she said. We're offering stability, the mayor's representative corrected. Naomi's mouth curved in a humorless smile. Stability for whom, she asked. Across town, Rue sat on the steps outside the shelter, watching the sky darken. He had not gone inside since Naomi left. The place felt tighter now, eyes following him in a way that was no longer merely suspicious. He knew the signs. When questions surfaced, people who asked them became problems. A young woman sat a few feet away, her jacket too thin for the evening chill. Rue recognized her from earlier, remembered seeing her argue with staff near the front desk. They say you talked to that lady, she said quietly. Rue glanced at her. I talked, he replied. She listened. The woman snorted. They don't like that, she said. Rue nodded. They never do. He thought about warning Naomi, about telling her to be careful. Then he thought about the men under the car, the confidence in their movements. Danger didn't announce itself. It waited. Back in her office, Naomi leaned forward, elbows on the desk, voice steady. I'm not stepping back, she said. And I'm not issuing a statement that hides what I've seen. Feldman's tone hardened. You're risking more than your reputation, he said. There are consequences. Naomi met the threat without raising her voice. There already are, she replied. For people without my resources. Silence followed, heavy and unmistakable. You're making this harder than it needs to be, the mayor's representative said. Naomi shook her head, though they couldn't see it. You're confusing hard with inconvenient, she said. I won't. She ended the call before they could respond. The decision settled over her with unexpected calm. Fear flickered at the edges, but beneath it was something steadier, more resolute. She thought of the foundation's board of donors who would call tomorrow with concerns. She thought of contracts and permits, of how easily access could be revoked. The system knew how to protect itself. But she also thought of Rue's words, truth's dangerous. Silence, she knew now, was worse. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Detective Harris, concise and direct. I refuse the offer. Pressure is increasing. We need to move quickly. She sent it, then added another message to her assistant. Prepare records for independent review. Full transparency. No exceptions. Outside the shelter, Rue stood as a familiar sedan pulled up across the street. He tensed, then relaxed when Naomi stepped out alone. She crossed toward him, her movements purposeful. They called, she said, without preamble. Rue studied her face. And they wanted me to step away, she replied. I didn't. Rue nodded once. Good, he said. Means they're scared. Naomi exhaled. It means things are about to get harder. Rue shrugged. Hard don't scare me, he said. Being forgotten does. Naomi met his gaze. You won't be, she said. Rue watched her for a moment, then looked back at the building. Then you should know, he said quietly. They're moving people tonight. The ones who ask too many questions. Naomi felt a chill. Where, she asked. Rue shook his head. That's the problem, he said. Naomi straightened, resolve sharpening. Then we don't wait, she said. Rue gave a short nod. Told you, he replied. Truth's dangerous. Naomi glanced at the shelter's darkened windows, the crooked sign above the door. So is pretending everything's fine, she said. As she returned to her car, Naomi felt the weight of the choice she'd made settle fully into place. The offer had been clean tempting, wrapped in language she'd once used herself. Declining it meant crossing a line she couldn't uncross. The story was no longer about an attempt on her life. It was about what happened when power was challenged from below and answered with silence. Naomi Blake had chosen her side, and somewhere in the city's shadows, the response was already taking shape. The van appeared without warning, sliding into the narrow side street like it had always belonged there. Rue noticed it because it didn't hesitate. Vehicles that were lost, slowed down, signaled, betrayed uncertainty. This one did neither. It rolled to a stop a few yards ahead of him, engine idling low, the body unmarked, plates conspicuously absent. Rue felt the warning flare in his chest, a heartbeat too late. He turned, instinct urging him toward the open sidewalk, toward light and people. But the door was already open. Two men moved fast and quiet. Their steps practiced, their faces hidden beneath caps pulled low. One grabbed his arm, the other his shoulder, the grip precise and bruising. Rue didn't shout. Years on the street had taught him that noise invited the wrong kind of attention. He twisted, trying to break free. But the second man drove a forearm into his ribs, knocking the breath from his lungs. The world tilted the curb, scraping his knee as he was shoved inside. The door slammed shut, sealing him into darkness, broken only by the red glow of a dashboard light. The van lurched forward, tires humming against asphalt. Rue pressed his back against the metal wall, breathing shallow cataloging details, the way he always did. Smell of oil and cheap air freshener. A loose rattle near the rear axle. One man in front, one beside him, silent now that the work was done. This wasn't random. It never was. Across town, Naomi Blake was finishing a call with an investigative journalist she trusted when her phone buzzed with a message from Rue, or rather, what looked like one. Single line. "They're moving people tonight." Then nothing. She stared at the screen, unease sharpening into dread. She dialed immediately. No answer. She tried again, then again, each unanswered ring tightening the knot in her chest. Naomi pushed back from her desk and stood, pulse quickening. She called Detective Harris. It went straight to voicemail. She left a message clipped and urgent. "Rue's gone dark. I think he's been taken. Call me now." She didn't wait. She grabbed her coat and keys and headed for the elevator, the building's polished calm suddenly intolerable. By the time she reached the shelter's block, flashing lights washed the brick walls in alternating blue and red. A small crowd had gathered at a distance, voices, low faces turned inward. Naomi parked illegally and got out, scanning the street. She spotted Harris near the curb, phone pressed to his ear, jaw tight. He saw her and held up a finger, finishing the call before crossing toward her. "We just got the report," he said. "Witness says a van took him." Naomi's stomach dropped. "I warned you," she said. "They were moving people." Harris nodded grimly. "We're canvassing now." "That's not enough," Naomi replied. "They won't keep him long." Harris met her gaze. "We're doing everything we can." Naomi shook her head. "You're still thinking procedure," she said. "They're thinking cleanup." The witness was a teenager with a hood pulled low, eyes darting as he spoke. "They grabbed him fast," he said. Didn't say a word. "Which way?" Naomi asked. He pointed down the street toward the industrial corridor. Harris barked orders into his radio units, dispatching sirens flaring. Naomi watched the scene with a clarity that surprised her. Fear was there, yes, sharp and insistent. But beneath it was a colder understanding. This was the consequence of refusing the offer. The system had responded the only way it knew how, when challenged by erasing the challenge. They found the shopping cart abandoned in the alley. Its contents spilled, blankets trampled. Naomi crouched and picked up a cracked thermos, its lid dented. The intimacy of the object hit her harder than any headline. This wasn't an abstraction. This was a life interrupted mid-breath. Harris touched her shoulder. "We'll find him," he said. Naomi looked up. "You need to widen your net," she said. "This isn't just muscle. This is organized." Harris nodded. "We've got eyes on the contractor," he said. "But this feels personal." Naomi stood, her resolve hardening. "It is," she replied. "They're sending a message." The message arrived 20 minutes later in the form of a call routed through a blocked number. Naomi answered without hesitation. "Ms. Blake," a man's voice said, smooth and unhurried. "You don't listen well." Naomi felt her heart hammer, but her voice remained steady. "Where is he?" A soft chuckle. "Always straight to," demands the man said. "That's the problem with people like you. You think everything responds to pressure." Naomi closed her eyes briefly. "This ends badly for you," she said. "It already has," he replied, "for your friend." Naomi's breath caught. "If you hurt him, you misunderstand," the man interrupted. "We're not interested in hurting him. We're interested in reminding you where lines are drawn." The call ended. Naomi stood frozen, the night pressing in around her. Harris watched her face and didn't ask. He didn't need to. "They contacted you," he said. Naomi nodded. "They want me quiet," she said. Harris cursed under his breath. "We'll get warrants," he said. "We'll move." Naomi shook her head. "They'll move faster," she replied. She looked down the street toward the dark stretch of warehouses and rail spurs. "Rue knows things," she said. "He saw them before anyone else did. That's why they took him." Harris met her gaze. "You're thinking of doing something reckless," he said. Naomi didn't deny it. "I'm thinking of doing something necessary," she replied. In the back of the van, Rue counted turns by feel, by the shift of weight and the sound of tires on different surfaces. He kept his breathing, even his mind, clear. Panic wasted energy. One of the men glanced back at him, eyes cold. "You should have stayed invisible," he said. Rue met his gaze. "You should have picked a different city," he replied. The man smiled thinly and turned away. The van slowed, then stopped. A door opened, and harsh light flooded in. Rue squinted, memorizing the outline of a warehouse, the smell of damp concrete and rust. He was dragged out and pushed inside the door, slamming shut behind him. Darkness returned thicker now. Across the city, Naomi Blake climbed into her car and started the engine, the hum steady beneath her hands. She had crossed a threshold she could not retreat from. The rules she'd once relied on had failed. The man who had saved her life was in danger because he had trusted her to listen. Naomi set her jaw and pulled into traffic headlights, cutting through the night. Whatever came next would not be negotiated over phones or softened by statements. This was the moment the story demanded action, and Naomi Blake intended to answer. The warehouse sat at the edge of the rail spur, like a forgotten thought, its corrugated walls scarred with rust and old graffiti, its windows long since painted black from the inside. Naomi Blake slowed as she approached, killing her headlights a block away, and letting the car roll to a stop behind a line of abandoned boxcars. The night hummed with distant machinery and the low thrum of the city beyond. But here the air felt sealed, expectant. She checked her phone. One bar of signal. Enough. Detective Harris's last message blinked on the screen, units en route. Do not approach. Naomi exhaled slowly, steadying herself. She wasn't here to play hero. She was here because time had been stolen and waiting had become another form of surrender. Inside the warehouse, Rue sat on the cold concrete with his back against a support pillar, wrists bound with plastic ties that bit into his skin when he shifted. A single bulb hung overhead, casting a harsh circle of light that made everything outside it feel unreal. The men who had brought him here stood a few yards away, speaking in low voices. Rue listened without appearing to. He had learned to keep his eyes unfocused, his breathing slow. Fear sharpened attention. Panic dulled it. He cataloged sounds. A generator somewhere in the back. The creak of a door on a loose hinge. The faint echo of footsteps on metal stairs. They weren't alone. That mattered. One of the men stepped into the light and crouched in front of him. "You like attention," he said, not unkindly. "People like you always do." Rue lifted his gaze. "I like living," he replied. The man smiled thinly. "Then you should have kept your head down." Rue thought of the blinking red light under the car of Naomi's face. When she saw it, didn't feel right, he said. The man straightened, irritation flickering. "You don't get to decide what feels right," he snapped. Rue watched him turn away, filing the reaction away. He had struck something tender. Outside, Naomi slipped from the car and moved along the shadow of the boxcars, the gravel crunching softly under her boots. She stopped at the corner and peered down the service road. A single truck idled near the warehouse exhaust, puffing white in the cold. No markings. She took a photo and sent it to Harris, then another of the loading dock, the door ajar. Her phone vibrated almost immediately. "Stay back," Harris texted. "We're minutes out." Naomi typed with steady fingers. "They have him inside. Lights on. At least 3 men. She hesitated, then added, "I'm not leaving." The reply came after a beat. "Don't do anything that makes this worse." Naomi looked up at the darkened windows and thought of the word worse, of how easily it had been used to justify doing nothing. She moved closer, staying low, the cold air burning her lungs. At the dock, voices drifted out, indistinct but tense. Naomi pressed herself against the wall and listened. "She's not backing off," one voice said. "She will," another replied. "They always do." Naomi's jaw tightened. She thought of the offer, of the calm assurance with which it had been delivered. Stability, they had called it. She edged toward the open door and peered inside. The bulb's harsh light illuminated Rue's silhouette against the pillar. Her heart kicked, hard relief and fear colliding. He was alive. That was enough to keep her moving. The shout came from the far end of the building, sudden and sharp. "Police." The word echoed, splintering the quiet. Chaos followed instantly. Footsteps pounded, a chair scraped. Someone swore. Naomi flattened herself against the wall as figures ran past the door boots, thudding weapons clattering. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Harris hadn't been bluffing. The response was fast, decisive. Naomi dared a step inside, then another, keeping to the shadows as the scene unraveled. Flashlights cut through the dark. Commands rang out, crisp and authoritative. Rue felt hands on him, rough but purposeful, cutting the ties at his wrists. "You're safe," a voice said. He sucked in a breath that felt like his first in hours. One of the men bolted toward the rear exit. Naomi saw him before the officers did his outline sharp against the light from a side door. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Stop!" she shouted, the word tearing out of her. The man skidded, surprise flashing across his face as he recognized her. For a split second, something like calculation flickered there. Then he turned and ran. An officer tackled him before he made it 5 steps, the impact echoing through the space. Naomi stood frozen, her pulse roaring until Harris's voice cut through. "Ms. Blake." He crossed to her, his expression a mix of relief and frustration. "You shouldn't be here." Naomi nodded, the adrenaline draining from her limbs. "I know," she said, "but I am." Rue sat on a folding chair near the loading dock, a blanket draped over his shoulders, an EMT checking his wrists. He looked up as Naomi approached, disbelief softening into something like understanding. "You came," he said quietly. Naomi stopped in front of him, the noise of radios and sirens receding. "I said I wouldn't step back," she replied. Rue studied her face, then nodded once. "Guess you don't say things you don't mean," he said. Naomi swallowed emotion tightening her throat. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Nothing that won't heal," Rue replied. "Can't say the same for some people's plans." Harris joined them, his face grim but satisfied. "We've got 2 in custody," he said. "One tried to run. Another's talking already." He glanced at Rue. "You did good," he added. Rue shrugged. "Didn't do it for the praise," he said. Harris looked at Naomi. "This goes deeper than we thought," he said. "Contracts, shelters, access points." Naomi nodded. "I know," she replied, "and it doesn't end tonight." Harris met her gaze. "No," he said. "It doesn't." The implication hung between them, heavy and unavoidable. As the scene settled into procedure again, Naomi stepped back and watched. She felt changed, stripped of illusions she hadn't known she still carried. The system had moved when forced, but it had taken a van without plates and a warehouse at the city's edge to make it do so. She looked at Rue wrapped in a blanket, answering questions with quiet clarity, and felt a surge of something close to anger at herself. How close she had come to letting him disappear into paperwork and caution. How easily she might have accepted stability in exchange for silence. When the ambulances pulled away and the warehouse emptied, dawn was already hinting at the horizon. Naomi stood beside Rue as Harris arranged transport to a safe location. "They'll want to keep you protected," Harris said. Rue nodded. "Figures," he replied. Naomi hesitated, then spoke. "I'm not done," she said, meeting Rue's eyes. With them." Rue considered her, then nodded slowly. "Good," he said, "because neither are they." As Rue was led toward the waiting car, Naomi watched until the door closed, the engine started, and the taillights vanished into the pale light of morning. The crisis had broken open the truth. But the truth was not a conclusion. It was a beginning. Naomi Blake stood alone in the cooling air, the echoes of sirens fading, and understood that the hardest work was still ahead, not to expose what had happened in the dark, but to change what had made it possible in the first place. The room Naomi chose was small and deliberately unremarkable. A consultation space on the 3rd floor of a community clinic, overlooking a narrow park, where the trees bent toward the river. No cameras, no staff beyond a single nurse who closed the door quietly and did not return. Morning light slanted through the blinds, warming the scuffed linoleum and the 2 chairs set facing each other. Naomi arrived early and waited, hands folded, feeling the unfamiliar discipline of stillness. Power usually announced itself through motion calls, directives, statements. Today she had decided to let it be quiet. Rue was brought in 10 minutes later, escorted by an officer who remained outside once introductions were made. Rue moved carefully, favoring one side, the bruises at his wrists dark against his skin. He wore borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit, but his posture was steady. When he saw Naomi, he stopped just inside the doorway, taking in the room as if measuring whether it was safe. Naomi rose. "Thank you for coming," she said. Rue nodded once. "Didn't figure you'd ask if it didn't matter," he replied. Naomi gestured to the chairs. They sat. For a moment, neither spoke. The city outside hummed softly, distant and indifferent. Naomi felt the urge to begin with facts, with assurances, with plans already forming in her head. She resisted it. This wasn't a meeting. It was a reckoning. "I asked to see you," she said finally, "because there are things I need to say without anyone else in the room." Rue studied her face. "All right," he said. Naomi took a breath. It felt different here, heavier, as if words had weight again. "I want to apologize," she said. Rue's eyebrows lifted, slightly, surprise flickering before he masked it. Naomi continued, forcing herself not to soften the truth. "Not for doubting you in the garage. Doubt happens. I want to apologize for the years before that, for the ways I learned to look past people like you and call it efficiency." She paused. "For trusting systems because they worked for me, and assuming they worked for everyone." Rue leaned back a fraction, absorbing this. He didn't interrupt. Naomi clasped her hands more tightly. "I almost let you be swallowed by procedure," she said. "I almost accepted an offer that would have kept my life tidy at the cost of yours. I need you to hear that I see that now, and that I'm sorry." The word landed between them without ornament. "Sorry." Rue looked down at his hands, then back up. His voice when he spoke was even. "Apologies don't fix broken bones," he said. "Or broken trust." Naomi nodded. "I know," she replied. "That's why this can't stop at words?" Rue considered her, the silence stretching. "Why me?" he asked. "Why now?" Naomi answered honestly. "Because you were the one I almost didn't listen to," she said. "And because what happened to you is happening to others who don't have a microphone or a lawyer." Rue's mouth tightened. "Happens all the time," he said. "People say they didn't know." Naomi met his gaze. "I did know," she said quietly. "Enough to ask better questions. I just didn't." The admission cost her something, and she let it show. Rue shifted in his chair, the tension in his shoulders easing by degrees. "All right," he said. "Say I accept the apology." "What then?" Naomi exhaled. "Then I do what I should have done from the beginning," she said. "I make amends in ways that change outcomes." She leaned forward slightly. "I've arranged temporary housing for you, private, safe, with medical follow-up. No press, no conditions." Rue's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but caution. "Temporary?" he repeated. Naomi nodded. "And then if you want something more permanent. An apartment near the clinic. I'll help with paperwork, benefits, whatever you need to stabilize." Rue studied her face, searching for strings. "And the catch?" Naomi shook her head. "There isn't one," she said. "Except that I'll ask for your consent before I ask for your help." My help doing what Rue asked. Naomi didn't hesitate. "Building something better," she said. "Not a photo op. A program designed by people who know what the gaps are because they've fallen through them." Rue let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "You're asking me to trust you," he said. Naomi nodded. "I am," she said. "And I understand if you don't. Trust takes time." Rue looked out the window at the park, at a man walking a dog. Too small for the leash it dragged. "I used to fix machines," he said. "You learn pretty quick. The problem isn't the broken part. It's the piece that looks fine but doesn't carry the load anymore." Naomi listened. "Systems are like that," Rue continued. "They fail quiet." Naomi swallowed. "Then help me find the parts that lie," she said. Rue turned back to her. "Only if you let me say no when it matters," he said. "Only if you listen when what I say isn't convenient." Naomi nodded. "Deal," she said. The nurse knocked lightly and entered with a folder, setting it on the small table between them. Naomi didn't open it right away. "There's one more thing," she said. "I'm going to say this plainly." Rue waited. "I was wrong," Naomi said, "about what justice looks like. I thought it lived in policy and distance." "I was wrong." Rue held her gaze. "Justice," he said slowly, "ain't a place you visit. It's something you practice." Naomi felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "Then I intend to practice," she said. They stood together when the meeting ended. Naomi extended her hand again, not as a symbol, but an invitation. Rue took it. His grip was firm, measured. "We'll see," he said. Naomi smiled faintly. "We will," she replied. As Rue left with the officer, Naomi remained by the window, watching the light shift across the park. The apology had not erased the harm. It hadn't redeemed her. But it had opened a door she intended to walk through with care. Quiet justice didn't arrive with applause. It arrived with listening, with repair, with a humility to be changed by the truth you'd once ignored. The first snow of the season fell lightly, almost apologetically, dusting the sidewalks and softening the city's hard edges. Naomi Blake watched it from the window of her office, a mug of coffee cooling untouched beside her. Cleveland always looked different under snow, quieter, as if the city itself were pausing to consider what it might become. Weeks had passed since the warehouse, since the apology spoken in a small clinic room without witnesses. The investigation had moved forward in steady, unglamorous steps, arrests made, quietly contracts terminated, shelters audited, and in some cases shuttered. There had been no sweeping press conference, no victory lap. Naomi had insisted on that. Justice, she had learned, did not need spectacle to be real. Her days now began earlier and ended later, filled with meetings that felt different from those she'd known before. Not with donors eager for recognition, but with social workers, outreach coordinators, former shelter residents who spoke with the blunt clarity of people long ignored. The new program they were building did not carry her name. It had taken some convincing, but Naomi had held firm. This was not about legacy. It was about repair. She glanced at the clock and gathered her coat. She was late for something that mattered more than any board meeting. The community center sat in a converted warehouse near the river, its brick walls scrubbed clean but left imperfect on purpose. Inside, the smell of coffee and fresh bread mingled with the sharper scent of cleaning supplies. Laughter drifted from one of the rooms, unguarded and genuine. Naomi stepped inside and shook snow from her hair, smiling as a volunteer waved her toward the main hall. Folding tables were arranged in a loose circle, people seated with mugs in hand, coats draped over chair backs. Rue stood near the front, sleeves rolled up, speaking to a young man who looked no older than 20. His posture was relaxed. Now his voice steady but warm, Naomi paused, watching without announcing herself. Rue had moved into his apartment a month earlier, a small place overlooking the park. Nothing fancy but solid. The first night he'd slept on the floor, despite the bed unused to comfort, that didn't demand repayment. Over time, the routines returned. Morning coffee, a job coordinating maintenance and outreach for the program, a role that drew on skills he hadn't used in years. He didn't call it a comeback. He called it breathing room. Naomi had respected that. They spoke often, sometimes about logistics, sometimes about nothing at all. Trust, she'd learned, grew in the spaces where nothing was demanded. The meeting wound down, people dispersing in small clusters. Rue spotted Naomi and nodded a quiet acknowledgement rather than a greeting. When they stood side by side near the coffee urn, he handed her a mug without asking how she took it. She noticed and smiled. "They listen to you," she said softly, nodding toward the group. Rue shrugged. "They know I'm not selling them anything," he replied. "Helps?" Naomi took a sip, the coffee strong and grounding. "We've got approval for the next phase," she said. "Transitional housing slots open next month." Rue nodded. "Good," he said. "Winter's not kind." Naomi watched a woman near the door laughing as she pulled on her gloves. "Neither is hope without backup," she replied. Rue glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "You're learning," he said. Later, Naomi walked with Rue along the river path, the snow crunching underfoot. The water moved slow and dark, carrying with it the quiet weight of the city's past. "I keep thinking about that day in the garage," Naomi said after a while, "about how close I came to driving away." Rue didn't answer immediately. "Most folks do drive away," he said. "Doesn't make them evil, just comfortable." Naomi nodded. "Comfort can be dangerous," she said. Rue stopped and looked out at the river. "Dangerous is pretending it's neutral," he replied. Naomi felt the truth of it settle familiar now. They reached a bench overlooking the water, the same spot where weeks earlier Rue had once sat unnoticed, watching people pass. A young man approached hesitantly, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Hey," he said to Rue. "They told me to check here." Rue turned his expression open. "You hungry?" he asked. The man nodded. Rue gestured toward the center behind them. "Come on," he said. "We've got coffee and someone who'll help you fill out paperwork without rushing you." The man glanced at Naomi, uncertain. Rue shook his head. "She's cool," he said. Naomi smiled and stepped back, letting them pass. The young man followed Rue's shoulders, easing as they walked. Naomi remained on the bench for a moment, watching the path, the city moving around her in small, ordinary ways. This was the ending she hadn't imagined, the absence of fanfare, the presence of work that would never really be finished. She thought of the offers she had refused, of the stability she had nearly chosen over truth. The cost of that choice still echoed in meetings that ran long, in donors who quietly withdrew, and officials who now returned her calls more slowly. She accepted it without resentment. This was what it meant to practice justice, not just speak of it. As dusk settled, Naomi returned to the community center to lock up. Rue was there, wiping down a table, humming softly under his breath. "You don't have to stay," she said. Rue shook his head. "Old habit," he replied. "Leave a place better than you found it." Naomi considered that. "I used to think justice was about making things fair," she said. Rue set the cloth down and met her gaze. "It's about making things human," he replied. Naomi nodded, feeling the simplicity and weight of it. Outside, the snow fell a little harder now, covering footprints almost as soon as they were made. Naomi and Rue stood for a moment, watching the flakes gather under the streetlight. "You know," Rue said, "people like to build statues for justice. Big ones." Naomi smiled faintly. "I've seen them," she said. Rue shook his head. "Justice doesn't need a pedestal," he said. "It needs people willing to bend down." Naomi looked at him, at the quiet certainty in his face, and felt something settle at last. "Then let's keep bending," she said. They parted at the corner, Rue heading toward the park, Naomi toward her car. As she drove away, she passed the parking structure where it had all begun, now unremarkable again, just concrete and lines and light. Naomi didn't slow. She didn't need to look under the car anymore to remember. The lesson was carried elsewhere now, in meetings without cameras, in conversations that began with listening, in the steady work of repairing what had been quietly broken. Justice, she understood, was not a moment you survived. It was a life you chose to live again and again, in ways that rarely made headlines, but always left a mark. The story teaches us that justice is not an abstract ideal, protected by institutions or power, but a daily moral choice made by individuals. The greatest injustices often grow not from open cruelty, but from silence, convenience, and the habit of looking away when something does not immediately affect us. True justice begins the moment we stop walking past other people's suffering and choose to listen even when it is uncomfortable or costly. It does not need monuments or applause to exist. It lives in humility and honest apologies, and in the long, quiet work of repairing what has been broken. In the end, justice is not something we claim, it is something we practice.